Hi, today we're going to go over the lead-based paint disclosure form that's required on all real estate transactions of homes built prior to 1978. And we're also going to go over the highlights of the pamphlet called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And I'm going to share some links with you in the video description below. A lot of the information I'm going to share with you, if you want to get a recap or read even more, you can go to HUD.gov and they'll share this information. They've got it posted available. And I'm also going to help you. If you're a property owner and you've got a property built prior to 1978, I'm going to show you, I've highlighted the form in yellow for the seller's portion of this. So the property owner who has to fill out the disclosure, I'll walk you through that and give you some tips. It's very straightforward. And then also I'll do the same. If you're a buyer interested in purchasing a home built prior to 1978, I'm going to go over your portion of the form as well, and talk a little bit about your ability to have a lead-based paint inspection completed on the property if you're interested. I think it's important to say that the lead-based paint disclosure form has not always been a requirement. Actually, Congress passed a Residential Lead-Based Paint Hazard Reduction Act of 1992 with the goal to protect families from exposure to lead from paint, dust, and soil. And Section 1018 of this law directed HUD and the EPA to require the disclosure of known information of lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards before the sale or lease of most housing built before 1978. And that's where this form comes in. I mean, that's how the form, became a requirement, was through that act. I'll start with reading you the description of the lead-based paint disclosure form. Lead warning statement. Every purchaser of any interest in residential property on which a residential dwelling was built prior to 1978 is notified that such property may present exposure to lead from lead-based paint that may place young children at risk of developing lead poisoning. Lead poisoning in young children may produce permanent neurological damage, including learning disabilities, reduced intelligence quotient, behavioral problems, and impaired memory. Lead poisoning also poses a particular risk to pregnant women. The seller of any interest in residential real estate is required to provide the buyer with any information on lead-based paint hazards from risk assessments or inspections in the seller's possession and notify the buyer of any known lead-based paint hazards. A risk assessment or inspection for possible lead-based paint hazards is recommended prior to purchase. And then I used my property, my street address as the sample for this form. So property address, I plugged my street address in. And now we're going to cover the seller's side and give you some tips on filling this out as a property owner. So let's review the seller's portion of the disclosure first. Under Section A, under seller disclosure, there's two lines. There's an A and there's a line for B. You're going to initial both of those lines, and then you're going to answer each of the questions that they pose on this form. The first question, presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards, check one below. And the first one is, known lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards are present in the housing. And then it says explain, and they provide you two lines to give a brief explanation of what you know. So if you have knowledge of lead-based paint, either through an inspection or through a report, or when you bought the property, the previous owner might have disclosed to you that the prior owner had knowledge of lead-based paint. If that's the case, you would want to check the top box, basically saying you do have knowledge that there is lead-based paint on this property. If you have no knowledge of lead-based paint, option 2 is probably your best bet. And it says, option 2 under Section A, seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the housing. And basically what that means is you had no knowledge. The prior owner of the property didn't disclose or share any reports or records with you regarding lead-based paint. And you didn't have any inspections or reports completed on the property during your time of ownership that revealed lead-based paint. Now, it doesn't mean when you check option 2 that it doesn't have lead-based paint. You're just saying you have no knowledge, and if you have no knowledge of lead-based paint, you're not able to share something that you're not aware exists. So that's section 1. So you're going to pick either the first one or the second, depending on your depth of knowledge. And then under section B, records and reports available to the seller, check 1 below. The first option, seller has provided the purchaser with all available records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the housing list documents below. And that's if, like I said, you check on section A, you check the first box saying you have known lead-based paint knowledge, then you're going to need to provide copies of inspections or reports on section B, and you're going to need to acknowledge the first answer. Or if you have no knowledge, you could check the second option, which is seller has no report or records pertaining to lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards in the housing. So again, if you had no knowledge, if the prior owner did not provide you any information that would tell you it had lead-based paint, then option 2 would be your best choice. Okay, let's shift over to the purchaser's acknowledgement portion of this lead-based paint disclosure. So the purchaser side is section C, D, and E. Section C, it reads, purchaser has received copies of all information listed above. So if there's any additional information beyond this disclosure form, that's what they're referring to. So you as a purchaser would initial section C. And then section D, purchaser has received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, which we always give those disclosures to the purchaser, to the buyer at the time of completing this form. And then also in section E, you've got basically 2 options. It says purchaser has, check 1 below, and the first option is you've received a 10-day opportunity or mutually agreed upon period, meaning between you and the property owner, if you've agreed upon a different time period, to conduct a risk assessment or inspection of the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards, meaning you've got 10 days or a mutually agreed upon time period to have the property inspected for lead hazards in the home. So that's option 1 on section E, or option 2, waived the opportunity to conduct a risk assessment or inspection for the presence of lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards. So if you're not concerned about lead-based paint and you're saying, no, I don't need to have that inspection completed, you have the right to check the second option on section E, and you can waive that right to do an inspection. So that's the key to the buyer's side. There is an agent acknowledgement. In that agent acknowledgement, we certainly initial, and we have an obligation to disclose to the seller their obligations under the law. If they have knowledge of lead-based paint or lead-based paint hazards, they certainly have to provide that. And there's strong financial penalties and even jail time if a seller actually knew of lead-based paint hazards in the property and they failed to disclose that. And so there's a section at the bottom called Certification of Accuracy. The following parties have reviewed the information above and certified to the best of their knowledge that the information they have provided is true and accurate. And the purchasers would sign under the purchaser section and date. And the seller, of course, would fill out this form at the time they list the property. And that being the case, the seller is going to have pre-signed this form before the buyer has ever seen it. And the time they fill that form out is when they're going to date this form. And of course, if there's only one agent involved, one realtor, they'll have their signature and date when they filled it out. If this is a cooperative sale where there's 2 different realtors, the listing agent will probably have already filled their portion out at the time that the property was listed when the seller filled this lead-based paint disclosure out. And the buyer's realtor more than likely will sign this form at the same time that the buyer completes their portion of this form. All right, so we've covered the lead-based paint disclosure form that needs to be signed by all parties prior to the sale of the home. And now we're going to go over the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. And this is more geared for the buyer of the home. And it's more of an educational pamphlet. And it explains why you might be concerned about lead in your home and some of the things that can happen in the event you have lead in your home. And it makes some recommendations if you're doing improvements to the home, if you're sanding on woodwork, where you could expose lead-based paint, dust, things like that. So we'll go over, and like I said, I'll hit the highlights of this form as well. The pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, is in a booklet format. It's a 20-page booklet. It's got some really good information in it. And basically, it's for anyone who's planning to buy or rent a home that was built prior to 1978. In the concept behind this booklet is to address basically 4 key elements. Well, the first one is how lead gets into your body, the health effects of lead and lead-based paint and lead poisoning, what you can do to protect you and your family, and where to go for additional information. So that's the premise or the concept behind this. It's more for educational purposes, just so that you're aware. A couple of the pages that are my favorite in this booklet: the simple steps to protect your family from lead hazards. And basically, if you think your home has lead-based paint, it gives you bulleted items on page 1 to be aware of and look for. Real simple, like I said, easy reading. And it's not a bad idea when you look this booklet over to just take a highlighter and mark any of the things that you think might apply. And on page 2, it's just basically telling you how lead can get into your body. And obviously, the simplest one is you could breathe in dust particles of lead, traditionally from paint specks or paint dust. That's the number one. Obviously, one that most people kind of almost joke about, but it's really not a joking matter, is eating paint chips. Especially small children who are teething, who are chewing on everything. If they get around a windowsill and chew on that windowsill, they can ingest lead-based paint or lead dust, and that can get into their system. And if you're refinishing woodwork or painted surfaces and you're sanding, those lead particles could get either on food or the areas where you prepare your food, or other places in the home. Now, page 3 deals with the health effects of lead, and it's again in bulleted points, so it's real straightforward, real easy to follow. And page 4 just gives you things that you can do to check for lead. And the simplest thing they say is the blood test. You can do a blood test that will determine if you have high levels or your children have high levels of lead. Page 5 deals with where lead-based paint is most often found, and that's pretty straightforward as well. It's done in bulleted points. Page 6, identifying lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards. The thing to take away on this page is the 3 items that they list at the top. They say on windows and windowsills, doors and door frames, stairs, railings, banisters, and porches. In the bottom section of page 6, they talk about the levels of lead. On page 7, checking your home for lead. There's several ways that they can test. One is a portable X-ray fluorescence machine, but the most common one that we see is lab tests of paint samples, where they'll remove a paint sample and test it for lead. And if you've ever had someone come in to your house to measure for carpeting or flooring, a lot of times they'll want to do a quick lead test first to make sure for their employees working on the property. And it doesn't take long to get the results back, and it's not expensive. Page 7 is just a continuation page 8 is a continuation of page 7, again, regarding checking your home for lead. Page 9, what you can do now to protect your family from lead. That's bulleted and very simple. Again, this is very easy reading, and you can hit pause on any of the pages in this video if you want to read them word for word, or you can click the link down below and you can actually see the actual lead-based paint booklet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home. We've provided a copy here. So on page 10, reducing lead hazards, it tells you what you can do to reduce lead hazards. Page 11 is a continuation of page 10. Page 12, renovating, remodeling, and repairing a home with lead-based paint. This is really a good one. And there's an additional booklet that is available called the Lead Safe Certified Guide to Renovate Right. That's definitely worth looking at. So that covers page 12. Page 13, other sources of lead. This one covers drinking water, and a lot of people wouldn't think about drinking water, but a lot of the older houses could have lead pipes. So the water that you drink could flow through lead pipes. And so that's a common one, and one you don't think about. That doesn't have anything to do with the house itself, but old toys that were painted with lead-based paint and old furniture that was painted with lead-based paint are popular too. So page 13 gives you some insight. Page 14 gives you phone numbers and contact websites if you want additional information. Page 15 is the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency regional offices, addresses, and phone numbers if you would like to reach out to the EPA. Page 16 covers Consumer Protection Safety Commission and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. It gives you their contact information. The last page, though, is maybe my favorite. And it says important: lead from paint, dust, and soil in and around your home can be dangerous if not managed properly. Children under 6 years old are at most at risk for lead poisoning in your home. Lead exposure can harm young children and babies even before they're born. Home schools, childcare facilities built before 1978 are likely to contain lead-based paint. Even children who seem healthy may have dangerous levels of lead in their bodies. Disturbing surfaces with lead-based paint or removing lead-based paint improperly can actually increase the danger to your family. People can get lead into their bodies by breathing or swallowing lead dust or by eating soil or paint chips containing lead. And people may have many options for reducing lead hazards. Generally, lead-based paint that is in good condition is not a hazard. So that page really gives more really good information than a lot of the other pages in the booklet. So that covers the protect your family from lead in the home. And I just thought it would be interesting to go over that. You might find that useful. And like I said, feel free to use the link to download this as a resource. Regardless of where you're interested in buying or renting a property. This could come in handy for any property that you're interested in that was built prior to 1978. I'm Sam Miller of REMAX Stars Realty, and I wanted to say thank you for watching our video on lead-based paint disclosure and the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to help. And again, I'll provide you that link for HUD.gov below where you can see all of HUD's information on lead-based paint disclosures and some of the information that they've shared with us. So thanks again for watching. I'll come back to you again next week. Have a good one.